Hello, my name is Mike Ward and I'm the Global Director of Content at Informa Pharma Intelligence Insights portfolio, which includes Scrip, Pink Sheet and In Vivo. We're here in Stockholm at BioEurope Spring, which is a partnering meeting that brings together pharmaceutical industry, biotech companies, service providers and also investors. And it gives them an opportunity to discuss some of the trends that are taking place, and also an opportunity to sort of source new deals, whether that's in terms of licensing deals or also investments. So I'm one of the hot topics in recent years is in fact being in the cancer space. Everybody seems to want a piece of cancer, and we've seen quite a lot of activity. I'm joined now by Ian Miscampbell, who is a managing partner with 6 Element Capital. This was a VC that was established 4 years ago with a focus on cancer. So Ian, thanks very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So 6 Element Capital, you're focused on cancer. What was the sort of the main driving force in the first place? Who sort of backed this?
So the main driving force, Mike, was a discussion we initiated with Cancer Research Technology, the technology transfer arm of Cancer Research UK. Yeah. And back in 2010-11, when we were thinking about raising the fund, they were experiencing some issues around how they took drugs which had been discovered in their drug development units forward from lead identification, lead optimization, and getting those moved through into the clinic. At that time, the funding environment was very hard. People weren't particularly funding early stage spin-outs, so they were struggling to find a mechanism to take many of their programs forward. And working together with them, we came up with the idea of raising a fund specifically to bridge that gap through to the end of phase 1, where you would then be in a position, if you've got a good data package, to license product to pharma.
So the idea was to actually raise some money that would almost seed or provide some sort of development capital to take Cancer Research UK projects to the next stage.
Correct. I mean, when we raised the fund, the investment thesis for the fund was that 2/3 of it would be dedicated specifically to Cancer Research UK funded science, with 1/3 then being available to do projects from outside that space. And the idea is that we can dedicate a significant amount of capital, up to £7 to £8 million a project, to take them through that lead optimization and then a significant phase 1 study.
So what is the sort of the geographic limitations? I mean, you sort of said that 2/3 is for Cancer Research UK programs, 1/3 is somewhere else. How far is somewhere else?
So somewhere else is something that's in part defined by the second of our key supporters in this activity, which was the European Investment Fund. And as a result of their focus, the other third in general needs to be spent in Europe.
Yes, okay. So the cornerstone investors were Cancer Research UK, European Investment Fund.
We then were approached shortly after we raised the fund by an institution called the Battle Against Cancer Investment Trust, which was a separate vehicle set up initially to think about funding cancer research down at the Institute of Cancer Research. Okay. But they decided that actually the best way to deploy their capital was actually to become an LP in the fund. So they joined us in December 14.
Ah, right. Okay. So how much money do you have then under management?
Under management, we have a total of $110 million. Right. And that's roughly speaking 60% committed now.
Right. Okay. So it's 110 million. Now, what is the approach? I mean, because if it's so Cancer Research UK programs, is the idea just to take assets and make them so that they're attractive to pharma companies, etc., or are you planning to build companies?
Yes. So one of the differences in our approach is that particularly for the Cancer Research UK programs, we can effectively adopt a virtual biotech model. So we in-license into the fund. We develop virtually, leveraging off the existing investment that Cancer Research is making in its own clinical trials unit, in its own drug development unit, and then we seek to commercialize by way of out-licensing as opposed to outright sale. So as a default model for those kinds of projects, it's a project-based financing model. we can also obviously invest in all the other traditional ways that a VC would normally invest.
Right. But it's kind of interesting. So I'm thinking there's sort of almost like the model, because normally with VCs it's just about the return on investment. It's internal rates of return, etc., etc. But with Cancer Research UK being a significant limited partner, one could imagine that there is in fact a strategic goal.
Oh, correct. I mean, when we were raising the fund, and it's Cancer Research Technology that are the actual LP on behalf of the charity. But when we were raising the fund, a lot of time was spent discussing what success would look like, because clearly for the charity at one level, managing to leverage the investment that CRT was making with additional resource from outside and getting that committed to investment in cancer, at one level that's a success. I mean, clearly people want to see drugs progressing, they want to see them progressing through to benefit the patient ultimately. But certainly for them, and indeed for the EIF in some ways, success was not necessarily a wholly financially driven issue.
Right. Now, with some of the other VCs who run asset-centric approaches, they tend to be almost like the sole investor. So in the sort of the 60% you say of your fund that you're already committed into projects or programs, how much is Sixth Element Capital the only investor, and how often do you engage in to bringing others into a syndicate?
So our default model is that we will allocate all the capital we need to get to the end of phase one, which is the typical value inflection point that we see. We're not concerned about syndication. However, we are very keen to only syndicate with people who are like-minded, who are prepared to take the long-term view about how they might be prepared to generate returns. So in our existing investments, we have one company, for instance, which we're in the process of raising a Series A traditional syndicated round for currently. That's Macrophage Pharma. In another project, we have a co-investor that's in on a project basis in our Check One program, and that's very much a financial commitment and a financial return for them.
Okay, so you're actually almost agnostic in the way that you're developing your companies. The idea is just that you get to the end game of trying to take that asset as far as you can.
Correct, and in many of the cases, in particular all of the Cancer Research UK programs that we are currently developing, we're not actually even putting those into spin-out companies or SPVs. We're simply taking that on a virtual basis into the fund on a license basis and developing it at that level.
So what does an asset have to look like to actually attract your attention?
The investment remit for the fund is that we've been set up to do novel, high-risk, first-in-class, first-in-man projects. Again, if you go back to the genesis of the fund with the input from Cancer Research Technology and the charity sitting behind it, they're not particularly interested in the next small step to improve performance of a compound that might already be well on the way to being developed. Their interest is much more geared around finding the next generation of stratified medicines, targeted medicines, which really need a good push at this stage to make sure that they'll be available in 15 years' time.
So, again, with other funds, some funds they have a defined lifetime. Others, some corporate VCs are actually almost like evergreen, yep, where the funds that you make or raise actually just get reinvested back. So could you sort of describe how yours is structured?
Yes, so ours is structured as a long, I would describe it as a long life fund. It's a 10-year initial life with up to 5 years worth of extensions. And that's been designed to ensure that, particularly for projects where the goal is to develop and then out-license the program, something that's coming in at the end of the investment period at, say, the lead optimization phase, may well be in our hands for 6 or 7 years before it's in a position to be out-licensed. So the investor group that we were working with basically said, well, let's have a fixed timeline, but let's have the flexibility at the back end so that when we get there, if we need to extend the fund, to be able to manage those last investments through to a point where they can then be out-licensed, we've got the flexibility to do that.
Okay, so everybody's now wants a piece of cancer because it is now the sort of the hot topic. So, what does deal flow look like, and also, how competitive is the space to actually make sure that you're getting an ability to invest in the most exciting assets.
So again, you kind of split our portfolio between internal and external. One of the great things about the relationship we have with Cancer Research Technology is that they are the commercialization business for all of the therapeutic research that Cancer Research UK is funding. And we have a preferential right to look and see what's in that pipeline and discuss at a very early opportunity with Cancer Research Technology what would be sensible for us to do. That said, there are some things that they are working on which are beyond the remit of a fund like ours. We need to be very careful that we don't get ourselves into a position where we start to create value but we can't get to an inflection point before we need to exit. So investments that need significantly more capital than we can invest, we either need to think very clearly about syndication, or we need to decide that actually they're not for us, and there are other routes that Cancer Research Technology can use to take that forward. So we're one of the tools that they have in the bag to effectively move those things forward. In the outside space, we're here this week sourcing deals, sourcing opportunities like many other VCs. And when we're talking about traditional Series A, Series B equity rounds, we're in the game the same as anybody else. I think that the USP for us in that discussion is this link back into the wider cancer network in the UK, and all of that can bring the value that can add.
Right. Well, Ian, thanks very much for stopping by and talking to us.
No problem at all. Thank you.